good authority that you took a long walk this morning, maybe around 3 miles or so.
I did, yeah. Around 3 miles is completely correct. And it is for an interesting purpose. It's because I met up with one of our flight experts.
Oh, no
Um,
kidding. Which one?
yeah, I got lunch with Daniel, so it was
Nice.
nice. Yeah, it was nice to be able to do that, and yeah, just meet up, grab some lunch.
Where'd you guys go?
She had famous foods. It's
Mm.
this really good hand pulled noodle place in New York, where now it's. I mean, this is a good question. And now it's sort of a chain because they have like 7 or 8 locations, but they started out in Flushing, Queens.
You got to go to the original one, just like that original
Yeah,
Starbucks up in Seattle.
there you go. Exactly.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you everybody for being here. Drop your flight questions, travel questions, whatever you got on your mind in the comment section below or to the side. We're going to get to as many as we can. By law, I have to take the first question no matter what. So go ahead and drop those questions in and we're going to get to them starting now.
Yeah. Chris says hello. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us. KK asks or says, welcome back, Julian. How was your trip? Thank you. Thank you for asking. Trip was very good. We were there during the tropical storm / hurricane, but we could not have gotten luckier. It like passed us either during the night or just it wasn't, as severe as it was when it hit where we were in St. Petersburg. So it didn't affect the trip at all. And then I have family that lives on the water, and I was a little worried about them, but they were all good. So turned out really good. Ate a lot of popsicles because that's what you do when you're in St. Petersburg. So yeah, thanks for asking though.
You can cross being in Florida during a hurricane off your bucket list.
I know. There you go. And because we were looking at it and it was a tropical storm, and then it like became a hurricane for I think like a day, if not like just an hour or so, and right where we were. So we were a little worried, but it turned out really, really nice. So I'm happy about that. Yeah. Enrique asks, hi, SEF. Guess what? Day off today. Oh, nice. No Lululemon today for Enrique. He goes, P.S. How many SEF team members can I invite for my wedding? Scott, what's the thought here?
We got to hear where it is, and how many cheap flights we can find to that destination. So let us know.
True. That is very, very true. Okay. Itzel asks, what's your thought on the new COVID variant affecting Europe? Will they close down?
It's a good question. So there have been new restrictions starting to get slowly put in place in terms of intra-Europe travel between countries in Europe. But with one small exception, which I'll get to in a moment, there haven't been any new restrictions that I've seen on places you cannot visit as an American. In other words, there aren't any countries that had been open for Americans that have newly blocked Americans visiting. The one exception to that is Malta. Malta now does require, I believe, mandatory quarantine for Americans and others. But other than that, everywhere else in Europe still open. I would be surprised if we saw a major wholesale kind of backslide into more restrictions on Americans for a few reasons. I mean, for one, many of the countries do require you to either be fully vaccinated or to bring a negative test, neither of which is 100% foolproof, but certainly goes a long, long way into tamping down potential spread. Two is the fact that, look, the European summer is really, really important for folks who work in travel and tourism there. And it was just starting to get into full swing. My sense is that we're not going to see a major change, but it might be a little bit more complicated going between different countries in Europe. Again, depending on how the variant and depending on how kind of COVID case counts and hospitalization rates look. But one of the, I think, bright silver linings that you see is actually the vaccination rates in Europe have now exceeded those in the US. There was a lot of talk early on about how the US really kind of got that early lead, got a ton of shots in arms. Didn't see it initially in Europe, but since then they've actually sped up and surpassed the US in many countries. And so I think with the amount of vaccination available, being relatively widespread now throughout the continent, you're not going to see quite as much of the sort of lockdown interventions that we saw in 2020. I don't think you're going to see that nearly employed like it was last year. I don't think you'll see it employed this year. But, this is all uncharted territory. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go along. This is my best guess on what travel will look like over the next, say, 2-3 months. Beyond that, it's hard to say. I think it's more likely not things will continue to stay open, but we don't know for sure, and it's largely a medical question, which I or nobody else has the answer to right now.
Yeah. Allison asks a similar question of, with the variant spread, what do you think things will change over the next few months? I know you just touched upon that. Are there any, I guess, broader outside of Europe thoughts that you may have regarding travel restrictions?
Yeah, it's a good question on whether or not this will, a lot of folks interested in being able to travel again to large swaths of Asia, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, which by and large cannot visit today. And will this push things back there? Maybe it's, I think it's too early to say definitively one way or another. But, remembering that as the variant is spreading, so too are vaccinations becoming more and more accessible. In Japan, they just passed 30% of the population now who have gotten at least their first shot, if not both shots. And that's going to continue to accelerate. So, it's really kind of a tough guess at this point to say definitively what things will look like in the fall. I'm still cautiously optimistic, but at low levels of confidence, again, given the way we've seen the variant spread. The good news is that, again, for folks who are vaccinated, still seem to have high levels of protection, most countries are still accepting vaccinated Americans for travel. So if you haven't yet, get that shot. Get yourself vaccinated, be able to do it as a favor for yourself, for those around you, and for that passport so you can go visit the world again.
Yeah. On other exciting news, Brooklyn Joe's going to be actual Brooklyn Joe tomorrow. He said he's heading back home. Nice. So I love that. Question from Holly. Holly asks, can we go to Paris with their new restrictions from the U.S.?
Yes, I haven't seen any changes in terms of Americans being able to travel there. Again, there are some new restrictions in terms of who, like going from country to country within Europe, that you're going to want to make sure you research closely, because it's shifting really quickly. Every day, basically, there's new things, either one place opening up or one place tamping back. By and large, it has not impacted Americans. If you're just going, let's say, from the U.S. to Paris, you can still be able to go there, especially if you've been vaccinated. But this is something that got to kind of be paying close attention to for now, because it's precarious. There's no guarantee that what exists today is what it's going to look like a month from now, for better or worse.
Yeah. Tristan has one of my favorite questions of all time. Wait, is this actually Scott? Appreciate you. Yeah, who knows, really? Yeah, that is Scott himself with his book right behind him on the left and the right. So there you go. And speaking of, this isn't even planned. Sarah says, hey, just finished the book. Loved it, using the tips.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, Sarah. Thank you so much for I'd love to hear, specific things that folks found interesting. What did you hate about it? Actually, no, don't tell me that. I've got a thin skin, but no. Look, I'm so glad. I get tagged every day with folks who are, Scott, I'm reading your book on my flight today. Scott, I'm reading this at the airport. The photos that people send over just warm my heart. So if you have the book and you're reading it somewhere cool, on vacation, in the plane, at the airport, post it on Instagram, post it on Twitter, and tag us. I would love to see it.
Yeah. So we talked about Paris, but we're staying in Europe. Chris asked, want to go to London in February/March. Does this seem realistic with everything that is going on?
Absolutely. I mean, it's taken longer the UK to open back up for travel than I think basically everybody expected. Right now, over 80% of Europe is open for American travelers. You can visit there. You might need either proof of vaccination or a recent negative test. But one of the only countries that is yet to, I mean, there's like single digit number of countries in Europe that are not available to American travelers, at least not without a quarantine. And one of those is the United Kingdom. That's how it exists today. Let's talk in a few weeks. Let's talk a month from now. Will it still be the case? I think it's unlikely. I think you're going to be able to visit there by summer's end, if not sooner. By February, March, I mean, you could take that to the bank, unless there's a total worldwide resurgence, the likes of which nobody's expecting. I think it's extremely, extremely likely you'll be able to take that trip in February, March to London.
Yeah. This is a question that I did have to search up the pronunciation for, because my island pronunciations are not the greatest. But Diana says, we're thinking of going to Tresera Island over Xmas/New Year's Eve. Have you been? Any recommendations? Do you know what the COVID requirements are currently, since it's not me?
Tresera Island, that's one of the Azores.
The Azores.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know the specific requirements in Portugal. If I recall, it's need either proof of vaccination or a recent negative test, or proof that of recovery. Julian, I think, is looking it up right now because he is a wonderkin at quick Google searches. But I believe the requirements in mainland Portugal are the same as in Terceira. So again, remembering that what exists today is going to be very different from what exists 5 months from now, almost certainly for the better as more and more folks get vaccinated. But, it's not as though this pandemic hasn't had any backsliding. So be prepared for things changing, and be sure you're checking up on things, in mid-December before your trip. But man, that's going to be an awesome time of year to be there. Have a wonderful trip. Really cool place to go. I've never been to the Azores, but if anybody else has, in the comment section, please leave us some recommendations for Diana so we can make sure she has as great a trip as possible.
Yeah. Just a quick, what I'm seeing is it says, obviously, a COVID screening test on arrival, but then there are exemptions from the testing of COVID upon entry, and that's presenting a valid EU digital COVID vaccination, and a couple of others such as that. So I mean, that's pretty standard with what you were saying, Scott.
There you go.
Yeah. KK says, shout out to the Scotch Cheap Flights team for keeping my inbox full. I've been balling out of control booking flights. We love to see that. I mean, that's the best. You can't beat that. And then Allison always has our back. She says that's Scott and Julian, for the person asking, is that actually Scott? So Alicia asked, any news on Chile? They were supposed to reopen today, but it doesn't look like that is happening. Hoping they open without quarantine for vaccinated Americans before our trip in November.
I haven't seen new news on this front, but for November, again, I would be very confident, in large part because 4 months is a lifetime when we're talking about changes having to do with the pandemic and COVID. Remember, 4 months ago was March. Like, the vast, not many people in the U.S. had been vaccinated. I hadn't been vaccinated. I don't want to speak for Julian. I don't know what Julian's situation was, but very few people had been vaccinated by then. And then within like a month or two, it felt like almost, tons. So, majority of the country was able to get vaccinated. The COVID case counts went from quite high, in January, February, to exceedingly low by, April, May. And so remembering that 4 months, things can change significantly. And I wouldn't get too hung up on what things look like today, which is one of the reasons why I still have some optimism for folks who are holding tickets to Japan later this year. Right now you can't go visit Japan, but every single day there are more and more folks getting vaccinated there. And I think it becomes more likely that those trips are going to be able to happen. Again, we don't know for sure. We're following it closely. We're keeping our fingers crossed. We're sending that good juju. But it's one of the things that I've really tried to encourage folks is don't get too locked into what the situation looks like today, because it might not have any bearing on what it looks like 4 months from now, much less 1 month from now.
Yeah, and I mean that goes with flight prices too. It's like what you're seeing today is very different from not only tomorrow or the week after, but maybe later today. I mean, that's definitely something to be watching out for. So Enrique says he went to Belize in 2017 when he got hit by a hurricane, went for a weekend, and trip turned into an isolation bunker moment. I mean, at least it's a story now that you can talk about. So yeah, silver lining.
It's true. It's one of the things to talk about with travel memories. Even when something wrong happens, at least you get a good story out of it. And you get to talk about that time you went to Belize and everything went haywire.
I know. There you go. Cindy Bo asks an interesting question. She says, "What about Americans visiting Ireland and making day trips into Northern Ireland?"
So Ireland is still said that they are going to open for Americans on July 19th, which is next week. That until that day comes, we don't know 100%, but it seems like it's on track for it. Right now, I do not know of the specific situation because historically, there's in the past 20 years or so, there hasn't been border controls between Ireland and Northern Ireland. For the most part, you could just drive on through. When I was visiting the island, is able to rent a car and drive from Ireland up to Northern Ireland, and you barely even knew that you were crossing country lines. There's a ton of obviously near history with the Troubles and everything happening on the island. So I don't know, though, what the specific situation is with those border controls and COVID, whether or not that is going to be something that you're going to find different. My best guess is that you still would be able to do that like you are today. You might not be able to take a flight from Belfast, say, to London, but that you probably could be able to drive or take a bus or however from Ireland to Northern Ireland. Don't hold me to that 100%. That's just an assumption based on the way the border has kind of been handled in recent years. It's very possible, though, that might change if Ireland is open for international tourists next week and the UK, of which Northern Ireland is part, is not. That having been said, I think it's very likely that sometime within the next month, the UK will open for Americans and others, and that this question, this issue will be moot anyway.
Yeah. This is actually something that luckily I have yet to experience, but I have always wondered. Brooklyn Joe, he asked, just checked in for my flight to Brooklyn tomorrow, and it has my first and middle names abbreviated. Has this ever happened to you? He's on hold now with Delta for over an hour and 40 minutes.
The thing that I have found happen to me that's really odd sometimes is, especially on United flights. So, it'll ask you for your prefix. And so I'll just put Mr. MR. And then it'll truncate that with my name. So it'll say MRSCOTT, as though that's my first name. Or Scott.
Or Scott, yeah.
Yeah, and, which is not my name.
This is Todd.
But I've seen it on my tickets dozens, hundreds of times. I've never had it actually be an issue. I would be very surprised. I mean, I would go back and look at your reservation. If the one that you made originally had your name on it correctly, I would be very, very surprised if you ran into any issues. Odd, obviously, that they are abbreviating your names like that, but I would I would basically look at what you put in on the original reservation and then assume that that's probably good.
Yeah.
You might get to the airport, 20 minutes earlier, or
True.
even I think you're very likely in the clear here. Man, so it's like I'm actually kind of curious now. So it's like on your so you've checked in, and then on your mobile boarding pass, instead of saying like, I don't know, your name's, let's say Joe, let's say your name's Brooklyn Joe. Instead of it saying Brooklyn Joe, it says B Joe. Yeah, man, that's a little odd. Yeah, gosh, I think it's very, very high likelihood you're going to be fine. I would probably be doing the same thing you're doing right now and trying to call up and just be like, what's the deal here? Like, why is my name like this? Because I think the issue is going to be less with the airline and more just double, triple checking that you're going to be okay getting through security. But the cool thing with a lot of airports now is they're actually moving away from having to show your mobile boarding pass or show your ticket at all, and instead just give them your like license or ID or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then they can basically see, oh yeah, Scott has a flight scheduled today. So they're not even comparing it against your ticket in many airports. They're just seeing, is Scott scheduled on a flight today? Yes, he is. All right, he's good to go. Yeah, let us know next week. I'll be curious to hear how this resolves.
Yeah, exactly. Next question from Allison. She's asking pretty much, you're always up to date, Scott, with requirements, testing, all of that. What are the sites that you use to keep up with the quickly changing requirements?
Oh man, so the best way that I've found to try to keep up with the requirements, especially when you're talking about any transit requirements, are either the airport's website or that country's like tourism or tourism websites. Their tourism minister, oftentimes they have good information there about what's required. Lastly, the airline actually tends to have pretty good information in their website in terms of what requirements you might need, because it's in their interest for you to be able to get where you're scheduled to fly. They don't want to fly you to, London only to find that you were not allowed in London because you didn't bring a negative test or something like that. They want to make sure that you're well prepared. And so generally they, at least with my experience flying to Spain and from talking to other people who've traveled to Europe, the airlines are fairly proactive about reaching out, reminding you about what, if any, COVID requirements there are. But checking the airport website, I've found, tends to be the most kind of accurate and up-to-date information.
Yeah. I saw a comment. Oh, there we go. Teresa said, got your book and love it. SES is one of my best discoveries in life. I mean, you just love to hear it. And that she's referred so many people.
Teresa, thank you. That is so nice of you to say. I appreciate that.
I love that. Rebecca asks, we were supposed to go to the Netherlands this summer to visit husband's family. How is it looking there? We plan maybe next spring or summer.
I know it's open for American travelers right now. I can't speak personally about how things are looking there, but if you're hoping to go next spring or summer, I would be shocked if that weren't able to happen. Whenever you go, it's an amazing country. You're going to have a blast. So, we'll keep on searching those deals. I know those Amsterdam deals have been popping up a lot lately. We found ones, I want to say it was just yesterday, for like $325 round trip from a handful of US cities, from all over the US to Amsterdam for like $500 round trip. So those are popping up again, just as they had very commonly pre-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the location, I think we sent 2 Amsterdam deals yesterday. So one was in the 500s, one was in the 300s. So obviously, depending on what airport that you are flying out of. But yeah, definitely seeing a good amount of Amsterdam fares, which are always exciting. Susan asks, when will Canada/US open borders?
Oh, this is a really fun question. There's a lot of hints. Fingers crossed that it might be happening in the next 2 weeks. I want to say the current ban is set to expire on July 23rd, if I remember my dates correctly. They've been basically extending it in 1-month increments. There's a lot of like tea leaf reading that this is going to be the last, that this past one was the last extension, and that by the end of this month, you're going to be able to travel again. I don't think we're going to know for sure until they actually make the official announcement. I think there's a decent chance we'll see it. But again, I think there's if it doesn't happen, I think there's reason to say, okay, the Delta variant or this or that may be why we don't see the borders open quite yet. I think they ought to be. I think the case counts are low enough between the two countries. I think it's not as though there isn't community spread in the U.S. and Canada already, that it's not going to add additional kind of risk by having that border be open. So I'd like to see it open much sooner, not least of which because I'd like to be able to go visit Canada. I've been vaccinated. It's possible that they'll have a requirement for vaccination or at least recent negative test. But I think we're going to know. I think we're going to know more probably a week from now, if not a little bit sooner.
Vivian asked, and you did touch upon this, but she asked, assuming accessibility doesn't change, do we need some proof of vaccination to take a train between countries? We're flying to Amsterdam and hope to take a train into Brussels. So you talked about between countries and flying between countries. How Vivian's wondering, how about the train? How about different forms of transportation within Europe?
So it varies widely country to country. Generally speaking, you are able to go between countries in Europe. This is one of the original promises of the European Union, to be able to have borderless travel and free flow of humanity between countries. One of the things, though, that has happened in the past 12, 18 months is each country is able to set its own rules about who's allowed in and what sort of requirements there are, whether it's recent negative test, proof of vaccination, maybe they close the border entirely or close it to certain countries. And so you're going to need to look up specifically, what does Belgium allow in terms of travel between countries? Are they allowing folks from the Netherlands to be able to take the train into Belgium right now? I'm almost sure that the answer is yes. Belgium and the Netherlands are both currently open for American travelers. But again, this is a situation that is changing. It's in flux. You're going to want to check right before your trip to make sure you are able to get down to Belgium as you'd hoped. Yeah.
Mayank says, Scott, I'm so glad I joined your group late last year, I think. Now I'm booked for the next 8 months of travel starting right now. Thanks to you. Greetings from Glacier National Park.
Awesome. Man. What a great national park. Congrats.
That's awesome. I absolutely love that. Enrique asks, hey, Scott, follow-up question. I'm going to Japan in January 2022. Any recommendations for things to do in Japan during the winter? Only been during hot, humid August, summer.
Ooh, awesome. Obviously, a lot of folks love to go up to Hokkaido, the northern island, and go skiing up there. You could go to some great onsen. These are, I think, the hot springs. They're both ones kind of within cities, which I've been to, or ones that are sort of in mountain, rural kind of getaways that look incredible. I'm sure you've seen photos of the snow monkeys taking baths in like these hot springs in the mountains. I mean, gosh, talk about vacation, talk about travel. Those are two certain possibilities. If your trip extends into February, there are certain parts of the country where plum blossom season is beginning. So we all know and love about cherry blossom season, which is usually late March, April, maybe early May, depending on where you are. Just before cherry blossom season, though, is plum blossom season, which is, if I may say so myself, 95% as good with 10% of the crowds. So beautiful, beautiful time to be there. I was there in February, and seeing if that is a possibility, seeing if there are any kind of like I don't know, what are they called, plum groves or good places basically to see plum blossoms.
Are the plum blossoms just and this is going to sound like a very basic question, are plum blossoms just the bigger cherry blossoms that you sometimes see, or is that
I want to say the flowers are bigger than cherry blossom flowers, okay. But it's basically just the blossoms on plum trees, just like the blossoms on cherry trees.
Got it. I've always wondered because yeah, with cherry blossom trees, like there's different variations. So I don't know, like, oh, is this just a different type? So yeah, if we have any
Yeah,
new,
there are a lot of different ones. The Sakura
yeah,
one is obviously the most iconic, but
right.
yeah, I mean, gosh, great. There's so much. I mean, gosh, there's so much great stuff to do in Japan. Definitely heading south if you're looking to avoid the cold, being able to go down to Fukuoka or even. Oh gosh, why is names escaping right now? But just being able to go down to some of the more southern places where you're more likely to, I think, encounter those plum blossoms is probably going to be the way to go.
Yeah. And if there's any, if there are any cherry blossom experts watching us right here, please hit me on that because I would like to learn more about it. It's just not something that I've really spent the time. Scott, one last question.
Let's do it.
Cool. Nick says, "Hey guys, premium member here. First, I finished the book and it was great. Hope you don't mind, but I'm gonna let my sister borrow it next. I don't know. Scott might mind, but
I'll make an
we'll see.
exception because you're a premium member and because you got the book.
There you go. He says, second, I live near Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is not exactly a great airport for a lot of travel deals. I need to fly round trip to San Francisco from May 28th, returning June 10th. I have Delta credit I will be using. Since it's a year away, should I just book it now or wait and hope the prices go down?"
Great question. First of all, thank you so much for being a great SCF member. Second of all, you're definitely right that Pittsburgh doesn't get as many deals as a New York, a Chicago, a DC,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that they get no deals. As Julian can well attest, Pittsburgh gets some amazing deals from time to time, especially considering how expensive flights normally are. We found just a couple months ago flights from Pittsburgh to Tokyo for $316 round trip. Where else could you fly for $316 round trip out of Pittsburgh? Philadelphia. So those great deals are popping up from time to time, maybe not quite in the same quantity, but the quality can still be exceptional, and we're searching for them to find them. Second of all, in terms of your specific question of flying to the Bay Area, you've got a few lucky things working in your favor. First, you've got three major airports in the Bay Area region. You've got San Francisco,
Yep.
San Jose, and Oakland. And I'm keeping an eye on all three of those. They're each of which are really accessible. Even if your final destination is San Francisco, they're all connected by the train, the Caltrain, the BART. You can get over really easily no matter which one you fly into. Second, making sure you're searching southwest.com separately. Their fares do not show up on Google Flights or Kayak or Expedia or anywhere else. Third, making sure that you actually are waiting to book that flight. I would be thrilled to get that flight. Considering it's around summertime, around Memorial Day, I would be thrilled to get it under $300 round trip. If you're flying out of Chicago or New York, maybe a little bit lower, under 250, but out of Pittsburgh to the Bay Area, under $300 round trip would be the sort of mental price point that I would set. With that in mind, I would basically be keeping an eye on flights and being patient for the next 9 months until it drops below that price point. I think it's very unlikely that it'll drop below that price point anytime in the next 6 months. The way domestic airfare typically tends to work is that the Goldilocks window for when domestic flights tend to be their cheapest is usually about 1 to 3 months ahead of time. You usually add a couple months if you're talking about a peak travel period, like sort of beginning of summer, sort of, yeah. So maybe more like 2 to 5 months ahead of time, I think, is when those cheap flights are most likely to pop up. There's a chance they could pop up earlier. It's not wrong to be kind of keeping an eye. I would set a couple price alerts, maybe. Obviously, keep your eyes peeled on our Scott's Cheap Flights alerts. But I wouldn't be booking a $400 flight right now. I wouldn't be booking a $500 flight because then you forgo the potential price drops that we might see later on if you book too early. And so that's why the Goldilocks window is not too early, but also not too late, just right in the middle when cheap flights are most likely to pop up. So with 2 to 5 months ahead of time, if you're talking late May, really kind of October through March, I think, is the most likely time. Maybe more like November, December through March is when you're most likely to see those cheap flights to the Bay Area, and when I'd really be kind of watching, hoping for them to drop below 300 round trip.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate, you taking the time and answering all these questions.
Likewise, thank you everybody else for being here. These are awesome, awesome questions. As always, appreciate you all. Appreciate you all who got the book, tagging us on those photos in the airport, on the planes and vacation. Is so heartwarming to see. And thanks again for the great questions. Keep us apprised of where you're traveling. We love to follow along vicariously. And we're going to be back